Well, the NCAA's Division I Council last week approved some groundbreaking legislation that, if approved by the association at large, will bring money into the pockets of some student athletes. Bill Benner has more in this week's Inside Indiana Sports. Bill?
Thank you, Gary. In part to stave off action and lawsuits by states and individuals, the NCAA Council has given a tentative green light to student athletes to earn money from what's become known as NIL, names, images, and likeness. And joining us today to offer perspective on what is certain to alter the NCAA landscape is Mike DeCourcy, longtime college basketball writer for the Sporting News and analyst for the Big Ten Network. And Mike, we welcome you to the program. Let's start off just by giving us, as best you can, a capsule overview of the NIL and what this potentially means.
Well, what it entails is basically two separate elements. One is the student-athlete run business. Especially with the advent of social media, we have seen athletes who have been able to create YouTube businesses, other social media, Instagram-type businesses, and have occasionally run afoul of NCAA regulators with that. And the NCAA in the new legislation will basically say, that's fine, we're good with that, go ahead and do it. And then the second element is the one that seems the most obvious and common, which would be endorsements. And that's where it's a little bit more complicated in order to regulate, because there are inevitably going to be clashes, conflicts between the student athlete's desire to endorse a particular product and products that already have an exclusive arrangement with the university where they attend. That's problematic. And then, of course, there's the booster element. And what involvement can the booster have in inviting athletes from the sports and teams that they love to endorse their products or endorse their or do appearances at their venues, that sort of thing. So those are the two elements where athletes are going to be able to make money. We know that for certain athletes, that's going to be a lot of money. We don't know exactly how widespread it's going to be, but I think it's going to have a really strong impact on how college sports operate.
And Mike, we mentioned again, some states, and I believe California was at least one of those, were embarking on passing their own legislation that really is kind of forcing the NCAA's hand on this entire initiative.
Yeah, and what the Florida and California in particular, and there's a few others, what they've really done is sped the process. They have forced the NCAA. I think that we were going down this direction anyway over the last half dozen years or so, with various activists pushing for it, with various court cases that leading them in that direction, and then with the state legislations of California and Florida in particular, they've forced the NCAA to say, okay, let's get this going. But they also have the issue now that they're putting forth a body of regulations. They really need they really need the federal government. The NCAA does. They really need the federal government to adopt what the NCAA is doing to some extent, so that they can do two things. One, supersede the state regulations. You can't have Florida with different rules than California and Indiana and Texas, et cetera, when they're all trying to play the same sports, so to speak. And then the other is the idea that the NCAA doesn't want to be sued because their regulations aren't generous enough, or that they restrict a particular area or whatever. So if the federal government were to legislate, then at that point, they wouldn't have to worry about getting sued either in the future or from past actors.
Mike, we think about Division I men's basketball and football, the revenue-producing sports, but for Olympic athletes, this could really be beneficial for them.
Yeah, especially Olympic-level athletes, not just those who are in what's classified as Olympic sports because they don't want to call them non-revenue sports. But for those who are at that level, like a Lily King, like a Katie Ledecky, players and athletes who are extraordinary in those sports will be able to do very well. And Katie Ledecky, and I'm sure Lily as well, I think Katie made like $355,000 in gold medal bonuses from the Olympic Committee, and she was allowed to keep that. And I would imagine that Lily probably did well there, too. She was so good in 2016. But I think those athletes will do really well. The question is, will any of this get down to those who are not at the elite level?
Mike, we have to wrap up. This goes before the entire NCAA at its convention in January. I assume that there's no doubt that it will be passed at least in some form.
Yes, no doubt it'll be passed in some form. I think they're still going to wrestle a little bit. This is what they call the comment period. So any suggestions that anyone has from the membership to tweak it, now's the time. And then they'll vote on it in January, and it'll be approved. And then they're hoping that the federal government can jump on this maybe in the spring, so that when Florida comes, their legislation comes online in July, they'd like to have it, I think, a new federal law that would supersede that by then. Well,
Mike DeCourcy of the Sporting News and the Big Ten Network, we certainly appreciate you taking the time to join us today. By the way, follow this guy on Twitter. He's really a good read and a very long-time expert in the world of college sports. Mike, thanks for being on with us.